Mishmash!
Hey, today we're bringing back the Core Faction Focus series with my very own faction. That's right, this is not some sort of fan thing. I was actually allowed to collaborate with Mr.Quar and I to bring a canonical faction to the series. That, of course, being the Principality of Gloam Hyyn. Now, if you've read into the lore yourself or have watched the previous episodes of the Faction Focus series, you'll know that the Gloamers have actually been mentioned in previous lore renditions. Well, actually just one, and only by name. But like with previous episodes of the Faction Focus series, you can expect a good portion of lore and just a little bit of hobbying at the end. That way I can showcase the new miniatures. But before we get into all that good stuff, I humbly ask, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share it with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to weekly Q&As in which I will showcase your miniatures. On top of that, you get access to exclusive roles within the Mishmash Discord and get to see some cool sneak peeks. And above everything else, it just really helps me out. Just want to say a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. And if you're interested in purchasing anything Core related, you can use my affiliate link down below to Wargames Atlantic, and you can plug my discount code MISHMASH5% to save 5% off your purchase. But enough of the promotional stuff, let's get tucked in, have a moth cake, and let's talk about the Gloamers. Well, not to play favorites in the Faction Focus series, but since I technically am the main host of all the knowledge of the Gloamers, I'm gonna get into the nitty-gritty. So where is Gloam Hyyn? The city-state of Gloam Hyyn is nestled within the Gulf of Kaftir, right between Quoot and Clowen. Gloam Hyyn, the city-state, resides entirely on the water. Here the Gloamers live their lives, fishing, trading dyes, and exporting herbal medicines. Gloamers of Alwyd are viewed as sacred ground of sorts. Though the Quar have no religion to speak of, the closest thing they have is great reverence for their ancestors and Alwyd as their home. Gloamers are the most wild grounds of Alwyd, but also teem with highly valuable natural remedies. Despite most of Kaftir viewing the Gloamers as the bumpkins of the nation, there is still a great deal of respect given to the Gloamers for thriving in such a harsh landscape. But don't let their appearance fool you, they are just as royalist as their neighbors. The Gloamers view their royalist cousins as overdressed and superfluous in their attire. Instead of paying a pretty penny for a shiny trinket such as a Kaftiran medallion, they opt to carve their own medallions using trees from the Gloam itself, bringing with them a little piece of home wherever they go. But to bring things back just a little bit, I want to go over their initial absorption into Kaftir. Much like their Gwynter's cousins, there was initially a spat between the nation of Kaftir and the nation of Gloam. However, a spat is probably a better way to describe this initial encounter compared to the grand stand of the Gwents against Kaftir. Within roughly a day, a deal had been struck between the two nations, and the Principality of Gloam Hyyn was born. Kaftir had realized the importance of the Gloam, and the importance of its inhabitants. After all, what's the point in settling into dangerous and treacherous land if you have no intentions of actually treading it? So rather than conquering with an iron fist, the nation of Gloam was born under the idea that they would just pay taxes to the crown, trade their herbal remedies, and export their dyes so long as Kaftir just leaves them to their own devices. Compared to most, this is a pretty lucrative deal. All because the Kaftirans view the Gloamers as kinda gross. Though this sounds all fine and dandy, this is not exactly the status quo of the modern era of Gloam. But we'll talk about that a little later. First, I want to get to some major characters. And of course, since they're a royalist faction, let's talk about their king, Map Earl de Bug. Pushing 55, King de Bug is venerated and beloved by the people of Gloam Hyyn and even portions of Kaftir. This is due to his heroic service to the Cry Muster during the initial invasion of the Crusade and his legendary stubbornness. Despite losing his right arm in the midst of battle, he had still led his men to push off an invasion of Tolmaree's Crusaders. He would actually continue his service after declaring himself more than fit to lead his men, finding the idea of a missing arm to be no such handicap. Up until he lost his right foot. If it were up to de Bug, he would still be on the battlefield to this day. However, his declining mental and physical health is keeping him wheelchair-bound. But this hasn't stopped his sons from following in his footsteps. But we'll get into that momentarily. First, I'd like to go over the combat doctrine of the Gloamers themselves. Despite living in some of the most wild portions of Alwyd, the Gloamers are not exactly the most well-trained riflers in the crime muster. Their effectiveness in the battlefield is almost entirely hinged on their unpredictability. They primarily operate with the combat doctrine of guerrilla tactics, often going with almost entirely improvisational plans and executing very fast attacks. If things aren't working out, it's time to retreat. On top of this, Gloamers are patient, and they're more than willing to sit in dubious and rather unsightly/hazardous environments for the sake of an attack. At the end of the day, most of their riflers are former hunters, trappers, and fishermen. Being in touch with Alwyd more than any other Quar has led their natural instincts to be heightened, and has led them to be able to tame some of the most boisterous beasts of the Gloams, this being the Sarfkin. Rather than fielding trench raiders, the Gloamers will release these slippery and energetic water drakes during blitz attacks. If the sounds of their shrill hissing and whip-like motions don't send enemy riflers into immediate retreat, their vicious bite surely will. Though by that point, it's probably too late. Though, funnily enough, the Sarfkin venom is often used in Gloamer moonshine. A secret ingredient, if you will. In fact, this has actually become part of a mainstay tradition of Gloamer forces. In their army structure, most as Keratins come from Kaftir. Gloamer hierarchy is only ever really augmented when it applies to larger scale armies. This is mostly just to keep things a little bit more organized in terms of army structure, as Kaftirans are not nearly as well versed in maneuver warfare. After all, Kaftirans and Gloamers are basically total opposites in terms of their combat doctrine. Kaftirans heavily favor planned out attacks, while the Gloamers rely on their instincts. And as a result, newly arrived officers will often be demanded to partake in the native brew as a rite of passage. You can probably imagine how this goes. Yeah, sometimes it's kind of honored, sometimes it's more or less a hazing of sorts. But for better or for worse, this tradition has led to some officers growing stronger with their Gloamer counterparts, leading to the typical cultural animosity to dissuade and for them to become more effective in battle. Now, one last thing I want to talk about in terms of the combat doctrine is maybe one of my favorite parts of the Gloamers, the Squeedle. This speed demon light tractor was originally designated the Skink, and was designed to take on enemy tractors, to perhaps one day replace the outdated Shaiweethel. This little beast was designed for rapid response and versatility, and these nimble vehicles were initially intended to counter and disrupt enemy tractor units with swift, precise maneuvers. However, the cost to produce these machines far exceeded Kaftir's budget, especially with the strain of the ongoing Crusader invasions in 1771. As a result, the resources were reallocated to the Crymuster's riflers, and the Squeedle project was sidelined. The prototypes were mothballed for nearly a decade, awaiting a revival that seemed unlikely. But by 1781, Kaftir's urgent need for reinforcements prompted the resurrection of the Squeedle project. After significant modifications to the original design, the Squeedle is now a formidable contender against most modern tractors. However, as the Arnyarns invaded into both Kaftir and their allied Krevish territory, production was hastened to field a small battalion of these agile tractors. By 1782, the Gloamer forces had been deployed to Kreven to support the RCEF, and were equipped with the long-anticipated Squeedles. These little tractors quickly proved their worth. Nicknamed the Door Knocker and Ankle Biter by Western Arnyarn forces, these tractors became notorious as a thorn in the side of the Fosgilde. They are adept at evading the clunky Danefen gun houses, and are even known to harass the powerful Telu Harn iron houses by sending fragments of their wooden shells shattering onto the ranks of unsuspecting riflers. This little thing is reliable, and it can take a crazy amount of abuse. In fact, these little things have actually been known to be half submerged to ambush patrols. Unsurprisingly, Kaftiran officers are actually quite appalled at the harsh treatment the Gloamers give to these little machines. However, they take it more as a tribute to the Squeedle's resilience. However, like with every tractor, there are downsides. If it's not obvious, it has a fixed gun, which requires aiming to be controlled primarily by the treads. And on top of it, this thing is a little fuel pig. And while we're on the subject of downsides, I realize I've basically only told you good things about the Gloamers up until this point. Well, this is where the bad things come in. Like I mentioned, the Gloamers are masters of the improvisational attack. If a particular squad's code is cracked and patterns are showing up, then they are very easily wiped off the battlefield. And like I mentioned, the Kaftiran officers are not exactly something the Gloamers are all too happy with. Because of the second breaching of the wall, tensions between Kaftir and the Gloamers are at an all-time high. Because of the economy crash of Kaftir and the Principality of Gwent bankrolling the rebuilding process of the first breach, most of the other principalities have been called upon to help defend Kaftir and their Crievish allies from the Western Arnyarans. It'd be one thing to defend the fatherland, after all they live within Kaftir, but it's another to pay out of pocket for your defenses. This has led to a dissent and divide within the Gloam itself. Despite a majority of Gloam Hyyn still backing King Debug, a discontent portion of the city-state has perceived this as a lack of protection from Kaftir's war and Gloam Hyyn's autonomy, which has spearheaded the idea that Mapril Debug is unfit to lead. However, the ongoing battle between Western Arnyara and Kaftir's border has proven to be an effective means of quelling some of the bickering. After all, the source of their bickering is not so much fighting Kaftir's war as it is fighting for their allies. Currently, Prince Gator is off serving with the RCEF in Creven. Despite the Gloamers viewing Kaftirans as outsiders, the general populace agrees that fighting for their father nation's protection is a necessary act for their own protection. Though a growing belief within the Gloam is that the idea of their own blood being spilled for total outsiders is unacceptable. And so that leads us to the modern era of the Gloamers, a principality that is both rambunctious and approaching instability. But we'll see where the core story takes us. Though this video is the main source of their lore currently, we'll have plenty of written history in upcoming releases, such as the next book in 2025. But now that I've given you everything there is to know about the Gloamers lore, let's do some hobbying. So for the hobbying portion of this video, I was kind of torn on what I wanted to do, because I do want to give you guys a good example of what the Gloamers are all about in terms of colors, as well as their gear overall for the miniatures. I know some of you guys are a little worried when I announced them that they would be kind of a cringy self-insert of me. Well, the only real self-inserty parts that applies to these guys is the more artistic perspective of how I paint them and how I design them. What I mean by this is Mr.Quar and I designed the Gloamers to be kitbashed. The packs are rather barren in detail, allowing you to add on just about whatever you want. This is actually very reminiscent on how I came up and built the original progenitor prototype models for the Gloamers. Fun fact, these guys are kind of what sold Mr.Quar on the design philosophy behind Gloam Hyyn. I'm really proud of these guys still, and I think it'd be kind of fun to run them as kind of Kaftirans turning native. Though as you can see, instead of the full pelts, we decided to add in straw. By the way, this is straw, not hair. Now, rather than just boringly going over how I do the purple, I'd like to go into the lore behind why the Gloamers are purple, beyond the fact that I just like purple a lot. Like I mentioned earlier in the episode, one of the main exports of Gloam Hyyn is their dyes. Not only does this play into their color scheme, it also plays into their overall design philosophy as well as their flag. You see, the Gloamers harvest their dyes from giant snails. These gigantic beasties are responsible for one of their main portions of their economy. And additionally, I thought it would be funny to make them a royal purple color, as they are the least royalists you can think of. To the Gloamers, purple is essentially the equivalent of a white t-shirt to us. See, it's not just because I wear a purple hoodie. Plus, I will say, this purple was actually a rather late addition into their design. See, initially, I wanted these guys to be a very dull set of colors, most of them of which I was going to paint in a very pallid and very pastel color scheme. I eventually decided on the brighter purple, as it does stand out more on the battlefield and immediately screams Gloamers. Plus, if you're gonna have purple in a game where each faction has a very distinct color scheme, you might as well go with the most bright and bombastic purple you can possibly go with. Additionally, I do want to mention, I did kind of show them earlier, but the Squeedles, as far as their color schemes go, don't really have any rules to it. There are so few in production that, as a result, the Gloamers just kind of paint them however they see fit. That means you. You get to pick how they're painted. Though in my personal opinion, my favorite way to color them is with the teal. That's just because I think it bounces off the purple well. And as far as the flags go, these will actually be filled in with more detail as time goes on. Like I said, there's still plenty of details to be filled in with the new lore releases. And if you're curious, I am actually working on a behind-the-scenes video on the inner workings on how Mr.Quar and I came up with the Gloamers. But if you don't want to be a member, totally get it, there actually are other pieces of art that I will be posting to the Discord, so if you want to check that out, please do. But with that, I've talked about the models, and I've gone over everything there is to know about the Gloamers. I cannot begin to tell you how honored I am to actually be a part of this. Roughly half a year ago, I saw a box of cough turns on eBay while looking for kitbashing parts. And ever since I've been in love, and now to actually be a part of this, to actually write something that I am proud of, that I love, and for Mr.Quar to be so receptive to my vision of these guys. There is no compromise beyond what would fit the world, what would fit the lore. And I want to get candid here, because not only was this something that I created, a lot of people helped me out with this. My buddy Marshall, who you can see on the streams almost every Friday, he helped me come up with a lot of little ideas to make the Yormans into the Sarfkin. He was instrumental with having a backboard to bounce ideas off of. The artists that are all featured in this video, Meaty, Eric, and Atar, they did amazing artwork. And most importantly, I want to thank you guys for watching the videos and getting me to a position where I actually can be a part of this. Your dedication and viewership to these videos was instrumental to getting us into this position, and I cannot thank you enough for that. To be able to be a part of something that means so much to me it's a feeling that you can't really describe. But with that, I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. So remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.